Chapter 3 of To Kill a Mockingbird introduces one of the most enduring themes in the novel, which is the idea of empathy. And we also continue to see a big theme develop in the early part of the book, which is just the idea of childhood innocence and growing up. So, a rundown of what happens in this chapter is essentially the chapter begins with Scout fighting Walter Cunningham. She's rubbing his nose in the dirt, and Jem comes and breaks up the fight. Now, the reason Scout is getting in a fight with Walter is because she feels like Walter got her in trouble in school, basically since he wouldn't accept money from Miss Fisher because he couldn't pay her back. So Jem, being older and a little bit wiser than Scout and being a little more empathetic, he invites Walter over to the Finch house for lunch. The kids that live in town are able to go home for lunch. So, they have probably an hour or more off. Scout and Jem and Walter Cunningham go there. Atticus treats Walter Cunningham with dignity. He talks to him almost as if he's an equal. And Walter, you can tell, probably doesn't get to eat all the same types of food that the Finch family does. He gets vegetables and he has molasses, and he pours the molasses or like syrup all over it. And Scout sort of looks at him like bewildered. She can't believe what she's seeing. She thinks it's really abnormal. She calls him out for it, and then Scout essentially gets a scolding from Calpurnia. And Scout, her defense, she says, he ain't company. He's a Cunningham. Because Cal says, come on, you can't treat him poorly. He's company. And that starts to show sort of the dynamics of the town. Like the Cunninghams are obviously looked at as a little bit below others. But Scout, being young, doesn't realize how important it is to treat everybody equally. So anyway, they end up going back to school. And back at school, Scout keeps a somewhat lower profile. But there is an incident when a boy named Burris Ewell has a cootie or like head lice in his hair. And Miss Fisher tells him to go home and take a shower, basically. And we learn that this kid only comes to school on the first day in order to avoid the truancy officer. There's compulsory education laws where you have to go to school. But the town of Maycomb makes exceptions for this Ewell family, essentially because they don't have a mom and their dad is a drunk and he doesn't work. And he blows all of his welfare money on whiskey. And so it's really hard for the town to kind of keep a control over the kids. And the Ewell family almost needs the kids at home to help run the household. So they make just one of those types of exceptions. Whether fair or not, the town does that. But anyway, Burris Ewell, we can see he's just mean-spirited. He actually calls the teacher a slut. And he leaves the building basically saying, you're not making me go home. I'm going home on my own, type of a thing. So we get introduced to basically another lower class family, the Ewells, but they're way different than the Cunninghams. The Cunninghams are lower class but dignified. The Ewells are almost labeled as trash in the story. And then finally, Scout ends up, I think we said in the last video, she gets in trouble for reading and writing. So she goes home and she had a miserable day at school, and she tells Atticus that she doesn't want to go back again. Actually, the way that she puts it, I think, is really funny. You can see like the sort of sassiness that she has. Where is it? She says, I told Atticus I didn't feel very well, and I didn't think I'd go to school anymore if it was all right with him. So they're just kind of funny, like almost like she sounds like she's trying to run the show there, but he ends up making a compromise with her, and he says, you can keep going to school, and we'll keep reading at home as long as you just don't tell anybody at school. And that's sort of, we see at the end of the chapter, Atticus being, I think, a really good parent and knowing how to handle kids and knowing to honor the things that to them seem really troublesome. Like kids sometimes make things seem like a bigger deal than they are. But Atticus doesn't undermine or underplay the things that are upsetting Scout. He sort of understands where she's coming from. And that actually, the whole understanding where somebody's coming from is an important lesson that Atticus tries to teach Scout in this chapter too. Because Scout needs to understand where Miss Caroline Fisher is coming from. So that's going to lead me to, I want to share a quote. Well, let's actually first look at some themes and topics. These are definitely themes we see in that chapter. The first one is empathy. We'll come back. We'll end with that one, actually. But it's really important, I think, this idea of empathy and understanding people, that really carries throughout the entire novel, this idea of understanding people and caring about people. We see these elements of good versus evil, and I think we learned about that a little bit through the Cunninghams and the Ewells. The Cunninghams and the Ewells are kind of, as far as social class goes, on the same level playing field, but one family is obviously much worse in terms of people, I guess, than the other, being the Ewells are not good people. We learn about human dignity too. For example, Walter, even though he can't pay for lunch, he will not accept money because he has too much pride, too much dignity. And we also see the idea of him deserving dignity. For example, when Scout calls him out at her house for lunch, saying, what he's doing is disgusting, putting syrup on everything, Calpurnia makes it a point to let Scout know anybody that walks through this door is your company, and you need to treat people well and as equals. And then just in general, the theme of growing up comes a lot here too. There's serious growing pains in chapters 2 and 3 for Scout. School is really difficult for her. It's a major letdown. I'm sure you watching this have experienced letdowns in your life. Everybody has things they're excited for that turn out not to be what they thought. Or, eventually they need to grow into that thing. And so growing up can be hard, but also growing up at times we think certain things are a lot harder than they really are until we really get more experience. Scout's too young to know really what challenges the world could offer. And also she's been lucky to have good role models from her brother and Atticus and Calpurnia. She's a good family structure. As far as some topics, we definitely see a little bit about small town Southern life. We're seeing how people know everybody in the town. It's a little slow paced. There's some kids in the school that don't even have shoes on. So we're seeing degrees of poverty during the Great Depression. Socioeconomic status is obviously a topic that comes up here too, meaning there are different people with different levels of income, and that creates different, let's say, advantages or disadvantages or ways of living or being treated. Obviously, sometimes having more money is a privilege, but in some weird senses in this book, the Ewells are so poor that they actually get privilege or exception, meaning they don't get in trouble if they don't go to school because almost the town knows there's nothing they can do about it. And that connects to this idea of the flexibility of the law. It's an interesting thing. The law we think of as rigid, but at the same time, humans execute the law, humans write the law, and that will come up a lot more in the future, just the idea of law. That plays a big role in this novel. The novel's broken in 2 parts. In part 2, you'll really see the law aspect of things come up. But let's end this video on with a quote about empathy, because again, that is one of the most enduring ideas. I think if there's top 3 takeaways from this book, it's the idea that it is so important to understand the plights of other people and to be able to put yourself in their shoes. So Atticus says this very famous line to Scout. He says, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." And he says that to Scout so that she understands, look, Miss Fisher's a new teacher. She didn't mean to punish you for reading. It's equally as hard for her as it is for you, being her first day as a teacher, fresh out of college, and not knowing the ways of Macomb County. This is an introduction to this idea of empathy, but as the novel progresses, it takes on much more challenging, I guess you could say, forms, and we'll see how this idea of understanding other people and where they're coming from comes into play. Thanks.